7th, 2016. Okay, so we'll start with the homage to the Buddha. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Okay, good morning, everybody. Okay, so today we're coming into the, call it the home stretch on the Majjhima Nikaya. So there are a few more suttas that I skipped over that we'll go back to. Okay, so we're starting today with sutta number 151. This is called the Piṇd apātapārisuddhi Sutta, which is translated as the Purification of Almsfood. Okay, so the word pindapata, it's a common word in monastic usage, and it means the food that one receives, usually the food that one receives on alms round. Though the word is given a more general sort of application, so that any food that a monk receives is called pindapata. So even if people bring food to the temple, it's still called, or if they invite the monk to the house and offer food, in a general sense you could also call it pindapata, the food that he receives. But in the stricter, narrower usage, it's the food that one receives by going on alms round. The word pinda means a lump, referring to especially to the lumps of rice, because people back in the Buddha's day, unlike today where they have like well-prepared, dishes, when the monks would go on alms round, often they would just get like a spoon of food from each house that they would go to. And pata is falling. So it's the lump of food that falls into the alms bowl. And this was an extremely important practice within the early Buddhist tradition, even continuing today in the countries of Southern Asia, in that one of its purposes is to establish a sense of community, you could say, a relationship between the monastics and the lay community, or the householders, because it shows that when one enters upon the monastic life, one is making oneself completely dependent upon the generosity of the lay supporters. I mean, things have developed and are quite different. Like here at Zhuangyan Monastery, we have a kitchen and a cook and volunteers who come to cook in the kitchen. So I just have to wait each day to hear gong, 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 gong. And then I walk up the hill and there's my food waiting for me. And if it's a rainy day, then I just have to call the kitchen and say, can you please send the food down? And I once thought of going on alms round around here just to experiment and see what it's like. But the squirrels just don't have that spirit of generosity. Like I think that there is one house across the street, a little to the going in the direction of Carmel, then I think you have to walk miles until you start seeing the next house. But a few years ago, when the other American monk, Kemeratana, was staying with me, we went into Manhattan intending to go on alms round. And so I had a little sign prepared which said, "I am a Buddhist monk. I collect my food on alms round. I don't accept money. Whatever you have prepared will be accepted with gratitude." And we went down 3rd Avenue in Manhattan. I went into a few shops and stood there with the sign, but didn't quite work. I think some of the shops that I went to, the thing is that the people who are working in the shops, well, first, they don't have any experience of monks going on alms round. And then the people working in the shop are not the owners of the shop, they're employees. So what are they to make out with? Maybe they see their employer in their mind's eye looking over them and seeing some deficiency in the accounts, some things missing. The only place where somebody spoke to me, I think it was a small Japanese restaurant that I went into, and the woman, she read the sign, but then she said, "I'm sorry, but this was like 10:30 in the morning." And she said, "We haven't started to prepare the meals for the day yet." So that was my experiment going on alms round. Yeah, I think somebody told me that there's an area in Lower Manhattan. They said Avenue A, Avenue B. I didn't even know there were such avenues in Manhattan, where there's a lot of Cambodian people, Thai people. So maybe I'll try that, yeah. Excuse me? Yeah, I know, yeah. But you might have just like leftovers from breakfast. Okay, so let us go into the sutta. Okay, so the sutta begins with the Venerable Sāriputta comes out from meditation, and he comes to the Buddha and pays homage to him and sits down on one side. And then the Buddha says to him that this is a stock passage. He says, "Your faculties are clear, the color of your skin or your complexion is pure and bright. What abiding do you often abide in now?" And so he's referring to, by abiding, he's referring to what kind of meditation have you been practicing? What kind of meditative attainment have you been in? And then Sāriputta says, "Now, Venerable Sir, I often abide," here the word is translated as voidness. But this was because this is Venerable Nyanamoli's translation going back to the 1950s, and the terminology for translating Buddha's terms was not yet fixed. But the Pali word is sunyata, and now the alternative rendering has gained dominance, and that is emptiness. And so in Pali, it's sunyata, or sunyata. And of course, this is the same as the better known Sanskrit shunyata, which forms the theme of the Prajnaparamita Sutras. And in the Pali literature, unlike in the Prajnaparamita Sutras, the word sunyata doesn't occur very often. But here it seems to be given special significance, particularly as when Sāriputta says that he often abides in sunyata, then the Buddha applauds him and he says, "Sadhu, sadhu, Sāriputta. Excellent, excellent, Sāriputta. Now you often abide in the abiding of a great man, a Mahapurisa. For this is the abiding of a great man, namely sunyata, or emptiness." Now I've been thinking about how the words sunya and sunyata are used in the text of early Buddhism, and I come up with maybe 4 ways in which it's used. Not that they're completely separable, but just in an abstract way, we might disentangle their entangled meanings. One is what I would call a psychological sense, and that is a sense in which the mind in certain meditative states is said to be empty of greed, empty of hatred, empty of delusion. We find this use in a sutta, let's see. This is sutta number 43 on page 395. For example, in paragraph 35, at the end it said, "Now that unshakable deliverance of mind is void or empty of lust, empty of hate, empty of delusion." Okay, so this is what I call the psychological dimension of emptiness. That is, a mind which is empty of defiled mental qualities, mental states. Okay, a second aspect of emptiness, this is what I would call, I have to use a big frightening word, ontological meaning of emptiness. Ontology is the philosophy concerned with the nature of existence, the nature of being. And in this sense, emptiness means that all phenomena are empty of a self or of anything belonging to a self, or that phenomena are empty of any kind of substantial nature, substantial identity. We see this meaning of emptiness also in Sutta number 43. This is on page 394 in paragraph 33. Here, I think it's Sāriputta who's speaking, who's explaining the deliverance of mind through voidness, or the liberation of mind through emptiness. And here the monk, gone to the forest, the foot of the tree, reflects, this is void, or this is empty of a self, or of what belongs to a self. Oh, this. Yeah, this would be referring to any phenomena that are being contemplated. Could be the 5 aggregates, it's 6, 12 sense bases, And in fact, this leads into another sutta that illustrates this meaning of emptiness. This is Samyutta Nikaya, chapter 35. I believe it's sutta number 85 or 88, something in that area. This is where Ananda comes to the Buddha and says that there is this expression, the world is empty. The world is empty. In what sense is the world empty? And then the Buddha says, it is empty in the sense that it is empty of a self or of anything belonging to a self. And then the Buddha goes on to explain what is it that is empty of a self or of what belongs to a self. The eye is empty, the ear is empty, the nose is empty, the tongue is empty, the body is empty, the mind is empty. All is empty of a self or of what belongs to a self. Well, it sounds even a little bit like the Heart Sutra, starting to sound like the Heart Sutra. Okay, so that's the ontological aspect of emptiness. And then a third aspect of emptiness, again I use a big word, frightening word, maybe you can call this the phenomenological aspect of emptiness. This is, phenomenology is the philosophy concerned with the way things appear within experience. And so this aspect is concerned, you could say, concerned with the way, what I would call particular ways of directing the attention in a meditative state. And we find the illustration of this in Sutta number 121. This is called, in fact, the Chula Sunyata Sutta, the shorter discourse on voidness. And so here, in a sequence, the Buddha is explaining to the monks how to direct the attention in successively more refined ways by bringing to mind what is missing or empty in a particular experience. We went through the sutta some time ago. Let me just take some examples. Okay, we just take the first passage in which this phenomenological approach is presented. This is page 965, paragraph 4. Okay, here the Buddha says, just as this palace of Migara's mother is void or empty of elephants, cattle, horses, and mares, and so on, and there is present only this non-voidness, namely the singleness dependent on the Sangha of bhikkhus, so too a bhikkhu, not attending to the perception of village, not attending to the perception of people, attends to the singleness dependent on the perception of forest. And then jumping down a few sentences to the end, the bottom of the page, he understands this field of perception is empty of the perception of village. This field of perception is empty of the perception of people. And so here one is taking the field of perception and focusing upon what is not present there, and that will give like one level of a perception of emptiness. And then one carries that process through successively more refined meditative states till one comes to the very high and exalted states of samadhi. Until we come to something like this: field of perception is void of the perception of the base of nothingness, void of the perception of the base of neither perception nor non-perception. There is present only this non-voidness or non-emptiness, that is, that connected with the 6 sense bases that are dependent on this body and conditioned by life. Okay, so this is what I call the phenomenological aspect of emptiness. And then there is a particular, that would be useful, particular meditative state. We actually find a series or a set of 3 very high meditative states, which seem to be like almost marking the threshold to the realization of Nibhana. So these 3 meditative states are called the Animitta Samadhi, the Animitta Samadhi, that is the samadhi, maybe we translate it as the signless or markless concentration. That is, well, actually there are different explanations. Let me just go through all 3 of them. The Apanihita Samadhi, this is Apanihita, you could say, is the desireless or wishless concentration. And then the Sunyata Samadhi, this is the emptiness concentration. And these are taken to be 3 different aspects or approaches to the attainment of Nibbana. And each one is sort of contemplating Nibbana in terms of 3 qualities of Nibbana. So Nibbana itself is animitta, markless or signless, because it doesn't have any of the marks or signs of conditioned phenomena. And then Nibbana is wishless or desireless, because in Nibbana there's no craving. And then Nibbana is emptiness, because it's void of lust, hatred, and delusion. And also Nibbana is void of any self or anything belonging to a self. And so the samadhi, which is focusing upon Nibbana under these 3 aspects, is called either the signless concentration, the desireless, wishless concentration, or the sunyata samadhi, the emptiness concentration. Okay, so what is the abiding in voidness, abiding in emptiness that Sāriputta has been dwelling in? Okay, the Sutta itself doesn't explain. It just says, the Buddha just congratulates or applauds Sāriputta and says, excellent, excellent. That is the dwelling of the Mahapurusha, the great men. But what is this abiding in emptiness? According to the commentary, what the commentary says is that this is called the Arahata Pala Samapatti, which means what can be translated, the meditative attainment of the fruit of arahatship. Okay, now the attainment of each of the 4 stages of awakening or enlightenment involves 2 aspects. One is called the path. The path is what I describe as the momentary breakthrough experience, where the mind emerges from all conditioned phenomena and just for a moment realizes or penetrates to the unconditioned. And with the attainment of that path experience, the mind breaks certain fetters or cuts off certain defilements. Just in one moment, it just breaks or cuts off those defilements. And then that is followed by an experience called the fruit of the path. And that fruit experience just lasts a few moments, in which one experiences the bliss of Nibhana, that bliss of freedom, just for a few moments before the mind returns to the level of ordinary consciousness. And one goes through these stages 4 times, it could be in the course of one life, over several lives, in order to reach the final goal. And then the final attainment is the path of arahatship, which cuts off the remaining subtle defilements, and it issues in the fruit of arahatship, that is, that blissful experience of nibbanic liberation. Okay, now after one achieves arahatship, one doesn't have to go through the path again. Once one goes through the path of arahatship, there's nothing further to be done in terms of eradicating any more defilements. But the arahat has permanent access to the fruition attainment. That is, when he wants, he can sit down and make the determination, the resolve to enter the fruition, and then he'll enter into that meditative experience, which is the fruit of arahatship. And in that meditative experience, he'll be, through the duration, he or she will be experiencing Nibhana, directly, without any obstacles, anything in between the meditator and Nibhana. And so if one wants to experience the Nibbanic bliss for a half an hour, one sits and one goes into the fruition for a half an hour. If one wants to sit for an hour, one makes that determination and one will experience Nibbanic bliss for an hour. If one wants to sit for 3 hours, 5 hours, one will persist in that state. And so apparently, Sāriputta had been abiding in that fruit of arahatship all day long. Okay, and that fruit of arahatship, in this case, is being called the abiding in emptiness, because in Sāriputta's experience of, one can experience the fruition of arahatship in any of these 3 modalities. depending upon which aspect of Nibbana one focuses upon. If one wants to focus upon Nibbana as lacking the marks of condition, as free from the marks of conditioned phenomena, then one will enter into fruition experience through Nibbana as the markless or signless. If one wants to focus on Nibbana as the absence of desire, then one enters into the desireless liberation. And if one focuses upon Nibbana as empty or void of self or anything belonging to a self, then one enters into the emptiness fruition experience. Okay, so this is apparently what the Buddha is applauding when he says that this is the abiding of a great man, namely emptiness. Maybe I'll ask if there's any questions at this point.
Is there a fruit of abiding in Nibbana beyond simply enjoying it? Simply experiencing the bliss of it?
I don't quite...
Well, like where I'm at in my meditation now, it's sort of a process of striving.
Yeah.
Once one has attained Nibbana,
yeah.
Why does one meditate? Why does one spend time in Nibbana? I mean,
I see.
It's kind of an odd question.
Yeah, I understand the question. I think because it's a blissful and peaceful experience, and one is free from all of the disturbances that come from, the impingement of sense objects.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, because that is like the final goal of this spiritual life, is to enter into the what's called the Nibbana element without residue remaining. That is the Nibbana with the passing away of the liberated one, the state of complete and ultimate freedom. But as long as one has the life in the body, of course, then one can't enter into that. But this is like the closest that is possible while still within embodied existence.
Okay. Thank you, Bhante.
Okay, Stephen?
Bhante, I have a question. If one is able to sort of apprehend sunyata, maybe in the ontological sense, and would that be sunyata ceto vimutti? And does that relate directly to an attainment? Or is that, when one is capable of that, does that relate to some sort of fetter dropping away?
The sunyata ceto vimutti explained in Sutta number 43.
Yeah, the ability to see sunyata, to really see.
In the sense of things being empty of a self or what belongs to self. That is part of what I would call the higher stages of insight. It doesn't necessarily entail that one has reached an attainment, but it is the path of insight that will lead to an attainment. Though somebody who's already reached an attainment can go back and cultivate that insight into emptiness, the emptiness of self or what belongs to self. But the fact that somebody is cultivating that contemplation of emptiness of self doesn't mean that they've actually reached an attainment. Okay, if there's no... Oh, yes.
Bhante, the difference between the first one, the animita, and what shunyata, concentration?
Yeah.
Doesn't it seem to be like very close?
Well, I can't just speak from personal experience. For us it seems like, because these states seem very abstract, so they seem very similar. But I guess that there is subtle difference between them, depending upon the aspect that's being stressed or that's being focused on. So it's said that the animitta samadhi comes from focusing upon the absence of the marks or signs of conditioned phenomena. And it's, in the Visuddhimagga system, it's related to the contemplation of impermanence. That somebody who makes sort of the basis of their insight practice, the characteristic of impermanence, will tend towards the animitta samadhi. Because what's meant by animitta, especially, it said, is the absence of the mark of permanence. And then it said that the sunyata samadhi comes to those who make their emphasis, their point of focus, the non-self aspect of conditioned phenomena, that all phenomena are devoid of self or anything belonging to self. Yeah, so they seem very similar, from a distance, but I guess as one gets close up, one could see subtle differences between them. Okay, let us go on now into the text of the sutta. So now the Buddha is going to explain to Sāriputta, well, for the sake of others, since he's speaking to Sāriputta, he's going to explain how to often abide in voidness, to abide in emptiness. And he does this in a very practical way. And this relates to how the monk should reflect while on the alms round. Okay, so he says that if a monk should wish, may I now often abide in emptiness, he should consider thus: on the path by which I went to the village for alms, or in the place where I wandered for alms, or on the path by which I returned from the alms round, was there any desire, lust, hate, delusion, or aversion in my mind regarding forms cognizable by the eye? And what strikes me when I just read that sentence is that it's very attentive to the details of going on the alms round. And unless one has gone on the alms round, it may be a little difficult to appreciate this, but we actually divide it into 3 stages. There's the stage where one is walking from one's monastery or dwelling place to the village or town where one is going to walk for alms. Okay, then there's the group of houses amongst which one is walking for alms. And then there is the walk back from the village to one's residence. So you can see in the sentence that alms round is divided into these 3 sectors. And then we have 6 mental defilements are mentioned, but actually they're really reducible to 3, because in 2 instances, 2 terms are used which are virtually synonyms. That is, desire and lust are the same, virtually the same, and then hatred and aversion are virtually the same. I don't know why the text uses 6 rather than the usual 3. Sometimes it could just be that, reciters, when they have a transmitted text, sometimes will add words as a way of commenting on the term. And then the word that's added as a commentary or a definition gets absorbed into the text itself. Okay, and this sort of advice that the Buddha gives is very important for one going an alms round, because, well, one has to be very frank. Okay, when one is living in the temple all day long, or especially a meditating monk living in a little hut, maybe high on a hill or in the forest, there's not very much to excite the senses. And, it's just looking out, trees, and maybe some monkeys or squirrels playing around. You look inside, there's nothing but a bed, a desk, a sitting mat, and nothing else. And the mind naturally seeks enjoyment through the senses. And in the case of a monk, living in a monastery, especially a younger monk, what one likes to see are females. And on the alms round, those who are offering the food, usually the men, this is in an agrarian society, during the day the men are out in the field, working in the field, or in the town, working in the shops. But at home, those who are preparing the food or going to offer the food will be the women. And in the family, for a young monk, there might be some nice young girls, 16, 17 years old, who will come out and offer the food. And so that one is taught that one should keep the eyes downcast, but there'll be a peeking up. And I know from personal experience, when one is just training to keep the eyes downcast and looking at the feet and just getting a vague impression of a young woman who's offering the alms, the mind will be fashioning images of, like, who are the beauties today? I mean, back in my day, it was like, well, past Marilyn Monroe, but I think past Bridget Bardot. I don't even remember in those days. But today, maybe is Taylor Swift considered a... No? What? But the mind will be just fashioning these imaginary projections onto the face. Till one looks up, sometimes there comes a big disappointment. But as long as the eye is focused on the feet and the hands, and then sometimes they will say, "How are you today, Bhante?" And that gives an excuse for looking up. Or when it's time to recite the blessing, one looks up. Okay, so the eye is sort of moving towards sights, forms that are delightful to the eye. And then, so this is the opportunity for, what do they say here in the text? Desire and lust. And then there are occasions when one is approaching the house. Of course, one gets the smell of delicious food. That's another kind of desire and lust. And when they're offering the food and one sees the food being put into the bowl, of course, ideally one is supposed to be indifferent whether one gets good food or bad food. But when you see that they've made some really nice preparation and you get the delicious smell, then desire, craving starts to arise. But then there are other occasions one is approaching the house, one getting closer and closer, and then one hears the grrr, grrr, ruff, ruff, ruff. I mean, big, deep, loud barking. And the smell is delicious, and you know the people are expecting you, but that dog is standing there, chained to a pole, but tearing at the pole as though it's going to break loose and start coming after you. And then there comes anger, aversion, frustration, fear. And then sometimes one will come to the house. I mean, this won't happen not very often in the traditional Buddhist country like Sri Lanka, certainly not in Burma or Thailand. But in India, there were, people were not all followers of Buddhism or even respectful towards ascetics. And so if one comes to the house, and people sometimes will say, like, get away, we don't want you around here. And in that case, if one is not well trained in mind, then there arises anger, aversion, ill will.
In such an instance, do you avoid the house, or what do you do?
Well, if the people say, get away, we don't want you, then one has to, move on.
But if the fear is internal, like there's a dog and the dog is barking.
Well, in the past, what I would do is stand there, and then when the people hear the dog barking, they come out, and since they want to offer alms to the monk, then they'll tell the dog, quiet, quiet, or they'll bring the dog into the house. Yeah, I think I would do that, yeah. Just for a couple of minutes. Yeah, because there's a story that comes down, actually it comes down, I think it's in the Milinda Panha, the Questions of King Milinda, where the monk Nagasena, he knew, this was the boy who was to become Nagasena, but the Sangha knew that this boy had descended from the heavenly world in order to become Nagasena, to become a great monk, in order to fulfill, certain responsibilities in maintaining the Dharma. But he was born into a Brahmin family. And the Brahmins had a somewhat antagonistic attitude towards Buddhism. But the elder monk would go every day to the Brahmin's house in order to try to make a connection, to get a foot in the door, to make a contact with this boy who was to become Nagasena.